Good morning. Apologies for the delay this morning. I am Felicia Marcus. Thank you. Oh, thanks. Chair of the board, and today is Tuesday, May 16th at 9:06 a.m., and the meeting is called to order. With me today are, to my left, Board Member Doreen Didamo, to my right, Board Member Tam Dodak, and Board Member Joaquin Esquivel to her right. Mr. Howard, would you please introduce the staff that's assisting this morning?
Thank you. To my left, Chief Counsel Michael Laufer. To my right, John Bishop, Chief Deputy. Eric Oppenheimer is handling some budget hearings this morning, and assisting the board are Janine Townsend and Courtney Tyler.
Great, thanks very much. Emergency evacuation procedure for anyone who doesn't already know it. Look for the exit nearest you, and if you hear an emergency sound, proceed with your things and your friends down the stairs and out to Cesar Chavez Park, where we convene over in the corner near 10th and J. If you need assistance, just let someone know and we'll escort you to a protected area. The meeting is being webcast and recorded, so that means two things. One is please turn off your noise-making devices or set them on silent. And the other is that when you come up to speak at the microphone, please, or if you're sitting up here, please make sure the microphone is close enough that the sound is picked up. We do want to make sure that people can hear you on the webcast and even in the back of the room, even if we can hear you up here. And so with that, we are on to public forum, and that's the time when the board hears from anyone who wishes to speak on an item that is not already on the agenda. We have one speaker, Libby Removic. Removic, good morning.
Good morning. Libby Removic, Sacramento. I'm calling about the city of Beaumont. The city of Beaumont was required to produce Title 22 compliant recycled water. For over a decade, it has claimed to produce Title 22 compliant recycled water. 2006, they were given a basin plan with maximum benefit requirements for Yucaipa and Beaumont. In 2009, the Water Board changed Beaumont's requirements and added a bunch of UV validations and declared that Beaumont had Title 22 compliant recycled water, even though they could not pass the Title 22 compliance test. What they left out is that there were three companies working out of the city of Beaumont. One was Urban Logic, one was Beaumont Electric, and one was General Government Management Services. Beaumont Electric was owned by Jim Love, who was also the electrical inspector in town. So he inspected his own products. Urban Logic formed a company in 2003 called Black Bear Valves, and they brought in substandard equipment. This is a picture of Beaumont's Title 22 compliant recycled water UV system. It looks like something out of Persia. It does not follow compliance. You could look at it and tell the equipment is substandard. Your staff went out there every year claiming that they viewed this, they verified it. This does not pass state and federal qualifications. If you look at Roseville, that actually produces recycled water with UV systems, it's like a little army lined up there. They have circuit breakers, and there's a big system where they have to have a cleaning system. These have a cleaning system to go through these UV lights. There is no way anyone looked at these Beaumont lights and thought they were legal in the state of California or anywhere in the feds in this country. These are substandard. And the problem is, for a decade, this state board has given this city permission to distribute Title 22 compliant recycled water that they do not have. You gave them extra distributes, and nobody knows what they're throwing out there, but it's nothing that passes for recycled water, and it never could. Now the city wants another $95 million to do it again because this doesn't work. And that's what $95 million would do. They would build it again for the third time. The citizens of Beaumont would pay for it. And where do they think they're getting that money? Well, they're getting it from the state board. That's where they plan to get it, because the city of Beaumont is locked out of the SEC. It's been locked out of the bond market. They can't get bonds. So they plan to get it from the board. And Kirk Berthold has assured them they're going to get that money from the state. Let me tell you something. This is UKIPA's finances. Structure and equipment, $330 million. A sewer system is infrastructure. It's a physical thing that lasts 30 to 50 years. It's an asset, money. $6 million in equipment, but $330 million in assets with $100 million depreciation. This is Beaumont Sewer financial statements. They got a $61,000 building. I told you people 100 times, you don't got no building there to verify. There's no building. $74 million in machinery and equipment. The reason they plugged those numbers into machinery and equipment is because it depreciates out. And unless they're audited and the state board does their job, no one would know the difference. You're not handing this city $95 million of the taxpayers' money when their asset is a $61,000 building. And did the city buy $75 million worth of furniture and stick it in a $61,000 house? No, they did not. They stole that money. Beaumont has pulled their sewer financial statements off the website. I put in a records request for documents that you people can't produce. I want those documents. You either stop this city and do your job, or you produce the documents. You show me the documents where you validated these UV systems, because they don't exist. I said to Laffer a month ago, give me an invoice, give me a receipt, give me a serial number off a machine to account for $74 million. And you got nothing. You can't hand me nothing. Here's your records request. Do it over and over till you get it right.
Ms. Romovic, can you let someone take pictures of those so that we have
Here
them?
you go, Laffer. You can add to your collection.
Thank
Go
you.
out there in Roseville and look at what a real place looks like, and then go to Beaumont, okay? And let me tell you what that man said in Roseville. He said, even if you had the UV system, the water has to be to a certain quality to get it to work. Beaumont never put in their secondary. When you read the bond, they never, the part to get up to the UV system isn't even there. That's the joke. They can't produce nothing resembling recycled water, and they never have. Before Copernicus ran out the door, the city manager, he stopped calling it a wastewater treatment plant and started calling it a sewer plant, because that's all it is. It's a rigged up sewer plant. Anything else? Thank you.
All right. Next, we're considering the minutes from the May 2nd and 3rd board meeting. I'll entertain a motion.
With one correction, which I believe Ms. Townsend is aware of, I move for adoption.
Second.
Else? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, minutes carry. All right, we have a number of uncontested items, items 2 through 5. Are they still uncontested? No cards. All right, well, thank you to everyone who spent time working on these. Our lack of spending time on them doesn't indicate any lack of interest or pride in the work that was done. Do I have a motion?
So moved with pride.
All in favor?
Aye, with pride.
All right, they all carry. Thanks for the good work. Informational item on hydrology. That's probably because the WaterFix people took them all and they're in the other room. We better go find them, yeah.
Good morning, board members, executive staff, and viewing public at large. My name is Kyle Oceandusco. I'm a senior water resource control engineer in the Division of Water Rights. Today I'm here for item number 6, the hydrology update for the Bay Delta watershed. Here we go in the northern Sierra. We can see that the precipitation is above record levels here. Currently, we are 200% of average to date. In the San Joaquin area, the central Sierras, we are also tracking along with records. We are about 187% of average to date and 71.2 cumulative inches of precipitation for the water year. And in the southern Sierras, the Tulare Basin area, we are not setting records once again, but still doing outstanding. We're 168% of average to date. We have our traditional reservoir slide here, seeing where our reservoir levels are throughout the state, the major reservoirs. The big gainers here are, let's see, Pine Flat and Millerton, but please also be advised that those are some of the smaller reservoirs, and so, changes there may be magnified. Everybody else is slightly increasing. Shasta's up about 2%, Trinity's up about 2%, and Oroville's more or less the same as it was 2 weeks ago.
Listening, we've talked about this before. Some of these areas, physically, the lake could have more water in it, but it's been released for flood control space because we have such a massive snowpack that's going to
That's
melt
correct.
out.
Right. So just as a step back, we are seeing that operators are trying to capture that last drop, but still provide for flood protection. And so not all of these reservoirs are at their tip top, but we are seeing that they're starting to manage and fill those as best they can. And then our +2 are relatively unchanged. The Kachuma Reservoir and Diamond Valley Lake down in the south, respectively, are at 48% and 87% of capacity at this time. Here's a look at the drought monitor. As of May 9th, relatively unchanged for the last 2 weeks, seeing some drought effects or some drier conditions in the southern part of the state and southern coastal areas, and a little bit over on the eastern Sierra, but typical for this time of year. And here we have California snow water content as of May 15th. And right now everything is looking good as we see snow starting to melt off. We're above that historical average light blue shaded area. And the curves of snow melt are more or less tracking with historical averages and what we've seen in the past. At this point, this concludes my portion of the presentation, but I'm here for any questions that the board may have.
I'm going to finally ask what I've been wanting to ask for a while, and that is about temperature, how we're doing on temperature. I know that we had the last 3 years, we had record-breaking high temperatures, and just wondering how this year fits in. I don't expect that you would know the answer to this today, but maybe the next time come back with us and talk a little bit about temperature and how that plays into reservoir storage and some of the operational decisions on releases for flood control, turning the dial based upon, predictions on temperatures.
Okay. Absolutely, we can bring some more information. At this point, we don't have an updated isothermal bath that we've shown in previous presentations. One nugget that we've seen is in early May, we noticed that the temperatures at Clear Creek on the Sacramento River started approaching about 57.1 degrees. And we've noticed that the operators out at Shasta and on the CVP side, they did a gate change, so they weren't drawing water from the top levels, but one of the lower levels, and they were able to bring temperature back down to about 53 degrees at Clear Creek and below. So we're seeing that as the seasons are starting to change, water is starting to warm up a little bit, and operators are, starting to work a little bit more actively on temperature and making sure that they meet those targets. But at a future hydrologic update, we can bring more information about that topic.
So I'm actually referring to ambient temperature.
Okay.
And the impact that would have on, the snowpack melting of the snow and those operational decisions with respect to voiding out flood control space.
Although that other stuff was interesting, thank you.
Yes.
That's important too.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then the other question is on Lake Kachuma at 48%. And again, I wouldn't expect you to know the answer to this today, but I visited Lake Cachuma, I visited the county a couple of months ago and understand that there are constraints to moving water into Lake Cachuma, but in part it's related to decisions as to when to take it, as far as the water supply considerations are locally. So just wondering, is there an ability to get those levels up higher than what they are?
We don't have that information today, but we can bring that back at a future board meeting.
The only other question I would have or request for some more information is just, I know there's at this point some early indications of perhaps an El Nino forming later this year, or at least an El Nino sort of pattern, and just any sort of additional information around what that might mean for us, which is, we know, always a mixed bag anyway. So
We'll do some more research.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Item number 7. I see folks ready, name tags in hand. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Marcus. Good morning, board members. Good morning, everyone. My name is Darren Pedroja. I'm a staff scientist in the Division of Financial Assistance. I'm here today to present our proposed guidelines for the Drinking Water for Schools grant program. This is an outline of my brief presentation. I will start with some background about the program, summarize our guidelines. After that, I'll give you an overview of the technical assistance contract, some of our outreach activities, and finally go over some of the comments we received on the draft guidelines. Senate Bill 828 added Section 116276 to the Health and Safety Code. The bill appropriated $9.5 million for the purpose of improving access to and the quality of drinking water in public schools. This is consistent with the legislature's intent that school facilities be maintained in good repair. And good repair is defined in statute as meaning a facility is maintained in a manner that assures that it is clean, safe, and functional as determined pursuant to a school facility inspection. Senate Bill 828 included some other requirements. One of them was to establish procedures for applicants, which we've codified in these proposed guidelines. The bill required that we prioritize projects located in or serving students from small disadvantaged communities and projects that have high effectiveness in improving access and water quality. Senate Bill 828 also required the State Water Board to provide technical assistance to applicants. So to finish up on the program background, I'd like to mention a few of the drinking water challenges facing our state that this program will help address. One example is drinking water that exceeds a maximum contaminant level, or MCL, for example, arsenic in groundwater in the Central Valley. Secondly, the lack of access to working fixtures that provide clean, appealing water, especially in food service areas, for example, water with poor taste and odor, or facilities that are in disrepair. There is an important connection between water quality and public health. We heard from many stakeholders focused on childhood obesity that increasing students' water consumption is an important challenge and that we can play a role in that. And lastly, there could be contamination from solder or old plumbing fixtures, and we are gradually learning the extent of this. I'll begin the summary of our guidelines with eligible project types. One of the key projects will be to install water bottle filling stations or drinking fountains. These graphics show units that basically function as both. Many programs in the state are showing that access to these water bottle filling stations does increase consumption by students. These types of installations can be outfitted with simple filters to improve taste or more advanced treatment that removes contaminants. And that brings me to the next project type. This project type would be the installation of point of entry, or POE, or point of use, or POU treatment devices, including up to 3 years of operation and maintenance to ensure the devices function properly. On the right is an example of a filtration system that was installed in the Arvin community with State Water Board funding through the Cleanup and Abatement account. So moving on. Schools that identify lead contamination pursuant to the Division of Drinking Water Lead Sampling in California Schools program could receive funding for various corrective action measures to address this type of contamination. This could involve point-of-use treatment, replacement or repairs of drinking water fixtures. If a temporary solution is needed to address impaired water quality or access, alternative water supplies projects would be eligible if a permanent solution is in the process of being implemented. Alternate water supplies could include bottled water or dispensers, especially in food service areas. And finally, the guidelines as proposed do leave flexibility for staff to consider any project with high effectiveness that leads to an acceptable result on a case-by-case basis. This table depicts our minimum and maximum grant amounts on both a per entity and single school or project level basis. We believe the proposed maximum grant amounts will ensure funding is distributed broadly across the state while providing adequate budgets for projects. Similarly, we believe the proposed minimum grant amount is needed given limited staff time. As I mentioned, the statute requires that priority be given to school projects that serve small disadvantaged communities as defined in statute. Only DACs would be eligible for any funding. The approach that we've taken to this is twofold. First, there would be an initial 9 months of the application that would be reserved for projects benefiting small DACs. Secondly, we're proposing to set aside funds for projects serving municipalities that are small DACs. These would include cities and some smaller school districts. We believe this will ensure rural areas are able to obtain funding. And last,
Just a second.
sir.
What's the cutoff on population between small and the second bullet on disadvantaged?
Sure. The statute that we're required to use is 20,000. And lastly, if eligible applications exceed the available funding, we may consider other factors such as the risk of adverse health impacts, severity and impact of the impairment, and the cost per student. We are proposing a continuous solicitation period as opposed to a series of funding rounds, meaning that applications would be processed and grants would be awarded on a continuous basis.
That's the reason for holding some of the money for 9 months, so that the small communities don't get swamped by everyone else.
That's correct. Proposals would not be scored or ranked by staff. However, we would consider eligibility and priority, the severity of need, and project effectiveness for each proposal prior to making a recommendation to our deputy director. So as I mentioned, the Senate Bill 828 did require the board to provide technical assistance This was appropriated in Senate Bill 826, so we have $500,000 available for that. Staff is in the process of selecting a provider, and we would then award the contract. We actually did just get notice about 10 minutes before this meeting start that they did award the contract to one of the bidders. The bids that did come in covered all counties. There was an average hourly cost from $114 to $124 per hour. And depending on the travel, which could be fairly extensive, this would translate to from 4,000 to 4,300 hours of technical assistance. The scope of work for the technical assistance providers will start with a couple-month period to spread awareness about the program and conduct outreach. Once we did open the application period, the technical assistance provider would assist small DACs only with completion of applications and overseeing some of their installations. Any additional intensive design and implementation work would be funded within grant budgets, and the technical assistance provider may facilitate these contracts or bid for some of that additional work. I have a few slides on our outreach and the comments we received. So starting with some of our coordination efforts. Senate Bill 828 instructed the State Water Board to consult with the Department of Education. We held numerous meetings with the department, including their nutrition and facilities units. Staff also held conference calls with several county offices of education. We met with advocacy organizations, including groups focused on food and nutrition policy, environmental justice, and rural community issues. Staff also hosted a public workshop on March 20th over in Rancho Cordova at the regional board. It was webcast, and viewers had the ability to submit questions via email. Okay, moving on to the written comments. Our draft guidelines were posted on the State Water Board's website for public review and comment on March 10th. Written comments were due to the clerk at noon on April 10th. In response to comments, we clarified a number of things, the nature of our continuous application period, sort of how we thought about project effectiveness, and the way we would prioritize projects. A number of commenters urged the use of eligibility for free and reduced priced meals, that program. They recommended that we use that eligibility to determine DAC status and as a way to prioritize projects. We did revise the guidelines to allow the use of eligibility if the demographic information wasn't available, so the population and median household income. And we also lowered our threshold from 90 to 80, which is another recommendation. Another area we received comments on the draft guidelines was the proposed use of the number of students benefiting from a project to help us prioritize. There was some concern about that, and in response, the guidelines were revised to indicate we would use the overall severity and cost per benefited student. Other comments requested some minor clarifications and or were not real specific to the guidelines themselves. Because the comments were fairly limited, we were able to conduct outreach with all the organizations who provided them. We do have a few more steps before we can open the solicitation period. First, we need to award the technical assistance contract, which we've just done. We need to execute that agreement. We hope that we could have that in place by the end of June. Meanwhile, staff can be working on finalizing the grant application itself and developing some web tools for the applicants. And we would hope to open the solicitation sometime in August, probably the end of August.
And that's because you need to finalize the grant guidelines before you can finalize the web tools that allow people to apply
Correct. We've been working on those.
You want to make sure it works before you open it for solicitation. I'm just wondering why so long. I'm assuming that's why.
Yeah, so Joe Karkowski, one of the reasons why we want to give it some time is so that the TA provider can conduct some outreach. So we want to make sure those schools who may not be aware of the program, that they're made aware of it, they can identify what any of their needs are. Again, to make sure those who maybe aren't used to being in our submitting applications for our grant funding can compete effectively for these grant funds.
And I'm sorry, I have Joe Karkowski to my right, our Assistant Deputy Director, and Steve Westhoff to my left, Attorney, OCC. We did get a late comment actually, which I don't know, that was one of their strong recommendations was a couple months to spread the awareness of the
Right,
program.
so it was supportive of taking that time. I just
Correct.
wanted to understand.
Yeah.
We usually get complaints about why everything takes so long, so that's why I wanted to ask.
Yes.
All right, other questions before we open it? Do we have any comment cards? No. Well, there you go. Thank you. As you know, this is one of those programs we do actually care about, and it's great that we have. Not that we don't care about the other ones. We care about all of them. We love them all equally. They're all part of our family. No.
With pride.
With pride. Yeah. No, it's obviously something that's important, and you've seen our dismay at time when schools have not wanted the funding that we've had for them. So I think getting the assistance and doing the outreach is really important. All these, it's balanced against the fact that we want kids to have healthy water as soon as possible within the means that we have to help them. So with that, do I have a motion?
Move adoption of item 7.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay, it carries. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for the good work, and we'll look forward to hearing updates. Right. Okay. Next, we have item number 8. Oh, see, now you guys have to shift the little nameplates. Yeah. Hi. Mr. Ekdahl, thank you for your help on that call this morning. You were great. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, Chair Marcus and members of the board. I'm Eric Ekdahl, the Director for the Office of Research, Planning, and Performance. With me, I have Sam Boland-Bryan, who's the Program Manager for our Groundwater Management Unit, and Jessica Bean, who's an Engineering Geologist in Sam's program. Today, we are bringing before you a consideration of a resolution that would adopt emergency fees for setting the State Water Board's reporting fee levels associated with intervention activities under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA. I think it's worth talking a little bit very quickly about kind of the context over the last couple of years, especially as we draw closer and closer towards the first actual SGMA deadline. When SGMA was first passed in September of 2014, that first SGMA deadline seemed so far away. It was 3 years in the future, and now it's rapidly approaching. We're less than 45 days out. The first deadline is July 1st or June 30th, when all of the 127 basins that SGMA applies to need to be covered under one or more groundwater sustainability agencies. Lack of a groundwater sustainability agency then can trigger state board intervention. And today we're going to talk about kind of setting the fees associated with board intervention and recovering costs associated with our activities. So with that little bit of introduction, I'll turn it over to Sam and Jessica, who have a presentation, and they'll run through kind of a brief overview of SGMA itself and then how the proposed fees would be implemented. And then we'll turn it over to you for questions and discussion.
Hi, members of the board. Sam Boland Bryan, as Eric said, program manager of the board's groundwater management program. So essentially, I'm going to give a brief overview of SGMA and state intervention, and then Jessica's going to go into kind of the details of what we're proposing today. I have to start every presentation on SGMA with an important recognition of the cornerstone of the statute, which is groundwater management is best accomplished locally. And SGMA provides this a process for local implementation, and it's to form groundwater sustainability agencies. Those groundwater sustainability agencies, or GSAs, have to then develop groundwater sustainability plans. Those plans will be reviewed by the Department of Water Resources. The GSAs then have to implement those plans and achieve sustainability within 20 years of implementation. The other important cornerstone of the statute, though, is that there is a recognition of the need that the state needs to step in when local management isn't occurring or is insufficient to protect the resource. And that's really the State Water Board's role in the process, is to protect the resource. Kind of some of the just high-level summary of what that means. We're referred to as the backstop, or state intervention is our process. And really, it's important to note that we can only step in where local efforts fail. Our process is meant to be temporary, as kind of the quote on the previous slide indicates. We're just there to protect the resource on a temporary basis until local management can come back up to speed.
Folks want temporary tattoos of this for us
Yeah.
all to wear.
I'll have it on my business card. And SGMA is very clear about when the State Water Board can step in. So we can't kind of do it unilaterally. Specific things have to occur, and we're really triggered. And this first trigger is quickly approaching, as Eric said. Starting July 1st, we may act in basins where there's no groundwater sustainability agency or there's no alternative. And just a quick note, an alternative is something that could have been submitted by January 1st of 2017. It has to cover the entire basin, and it's essentially an alternative route to compliance for those folks that were already well managed. And so the statute gave them an opportunity to demonstrate that. The next trigger we have is for basins that are in critical overdraft. If they have to have a groundwater sustainability plan in place by 2020. Basins that are high or medium priority, but not in critical overdraft, have to have a plan in place by 2022. And then finally, if they have a plan, but the Department of Water Resources, DWR, finds that the plan is inadequate, and the basin is experiencing significant depletions of surface waters that are caused by groundwater pumping, the State Water Board can act to remedy those issues in 2025. And the important takeaway here is that there's a long timeline with the State Water Board's role as it unfolds as part of the SGMA process. Getting a little more specific into the near-term actions, which is what everyone's most interested in, I have a few conceptual examples. I showed them in the workshop, but I wanted to show them again in case folks couldn't make it to the workshop. Say we have our basin, and then we have a groundwater sustainability agency that forms in that basin, but it doesn't cover all of the basin. The areas outside of that GSA will be considered unmanaged. So we're referring to those as unmanaged areas. Extractors in unmanaged areas are subject to reporting requirements starting July 1st. In addition to that, the other process that can begin at the discretion of the State Water Board is that we may designate the entire basin probationary. And so I think it's worthwhile to note that there's two processes that start July 1st. Another important example of what's happening locally is that there's multiple agencies forming within a basin, but if the GSAs are overlapping, that area is unmanaged because those filings don't take effect. Same as I said in the previous slide, folks in the unmanaged area are subject to reporting requirements because those GSA notices didn't take effect, and the entire basin may be designated probationary. And while these hypothetical examples are good to get the concepts across, it's also worthwhile to show what's happening on the ground. And so to try and be helpful and show where our authority may apply, we've developed maps of unmanaged areas, and this is based on the information provided to the Department of Water Resources. And so to try and help stakeholders understand where the reporting requirements may apply, this is an interactive map available on our website. And so you can kind of zoom in and out. I didn't want to do a live demo because that's always risky in a presentation. But if you move to the kind of zooming in on one area, imagine you're scrolling, that you can focus in and see where kind of specifically even your property is, whether it's in an unmanaged area or not. And I think this will be important to make people aware of the requirements if they do have to report. We kind of want to give them a fair chance.
And this would be not definitive for the public to be looking at this, because this area perhaps could be in an area that has not yet submitted a GSA.
Correct. Thanks for that clarification. So there are a lot of GSA processes in place right now, and so this information is just based on what the Department of Water Resources has posted to its website. So there's even a lag between when the department receives information and when they post it of up to 15 days. And then this map also, we're trying to update it weekly, but this information is current as of May 10th.
So you're trying to give a heads up to watch this space, not hair on fire.
Yeah. It's just kind of more of a FYI at this point to try and be helpful. Moving into what this is showing, though, it's extractors within these red areas are subject to the reporting requirements, these unmanaged area reporting requirements. And the information that will have to be submitted is their well location, the capacity of the well, the volumes of water extracted, and where the water is being used and what that purpose of use is. It's important to note that de minimis pumpers are not subject to this unmanaged area reporting requirements. A de minimis user is someone who pumps 2 acre-feet or less for domestic purposes specifically. Moving into the other process, though, that happens, the probationary designation. This is where the board has discretion. It will be a hearing and kind of an official board proceeding to designate a basin probationary. It's really an opportunity for locals to fix the issues that got the State Water Board involved. The board will collect additional information, and we may loop in de minimis users if we think it's appropriate for management of the basin. If the issues don't get fixed, we move to kind of the final action in the state intervention process, which is development of an interim plan. And this is our management tool to correct issues within the basin on a temporary basis, but where we see that we need to manage extractions. It is a fairly streamlined plan. It's not comparable to a groundwater sustainability plan because it's meant to be temporary. It really has 4 key components. We identify corrective actions, a schedule for those actions, monitoring to determine if the actions are working, and then the plan is subject to CEQA. This kind of goes over a high-level summary of all of the programmatic activities. And why we're here today is that we're not doing these activities for free. The statute requires us to recover our costs through fees. And so that's what the emergency regulation is, and it's to meet that requirement of SGMA that we recover our costs. The statute gave us the ability to implement the fees through an emergency regulation. And this is really beneficial and something that's going to help us be thoughtful as we move forward, because we can update the fees as needed to make sure that they're set appropriately so that we're not collecting too much money. We're not trying to earn a profit on this process. We're just trying to recover the cost of the program. And so we will review the fees at least annually as recognized in the resolution.
Something we do on all of our fees. I noticed some of the comments ask for us to do it using different words, but it is something that we do every year. So.
Yeah, and so it's something we recognize is going to be important for this process too. So we've done a lot of outreach on this. We started in August of 2016 with focused discussions. We then kind of had a public draft. We held a workshop, which was in March 21st. There was a comment period for the draft emergency regulations that was open from March 10th to April 7th. We received some good comments. Some folks, some of the feedback was the fees are too high. Others thought it was too low. The bulk of the comments were on clarifications, and those are things we've addressed. And Jessica's going to kind of go over the regulation and what's changed, and then kind of go into the details of what we're proposing today.
Thank you. Okay. So as Sam mentioned, we made several changes to the emergency regulations since you last saw it. The bulk of them were procedural changes, so we had some typographical errors that we updated. If you take a look at the agenda item, there is a strikeout version so that you can see the specific changes. We added the section numbers that will actually be included in the California Code of Regulations, so it should be easier to reference back and forth and see things.
And you double checked it to make sure the references all.
I'm pretty sure we quadruple checked it, but we'll do it again. So some of the sections that were added for clarification were for administration of fees, when the fees are going to be due. There's also for fee liability, and then we did clarify what the penalties would be for noncompliance with the regulation to get some clarification there. We also added the section for petition of reconsideration. So if somebody feels that our determination that they needed to pay a fee, or perhaps the amount of the fee was calculated incorrectly, there's a process that they can go through to petition for that. The only real change that we made to the fee values themselves have to do with this maximum late fee amount for the water year 2017 fees. So again, those are the reports due on December 15th of this year. And there's a slightly different fee schedule for that, but the maximum fee before was $1,500, and we've reduced that to a maximum fee of $1,200. And then the other major change is there's now a section on electronic filing of reports. And I'm going to go over that next, but I wanted to see if you had any questions on these changes since I just touched on them pretty quickly. No? Okay. So SGMA gives the board authority to require that groundwater extraction reports are filed electronically. Although this was not included in our draft regulation, staff were working on a similar process simultaneously. And after the workshop in March, some of the comments that we received were specific around the reporting that it just made sense to lump them together and put the requirements into this regulation. So while the bulk of the requirements still revolve around fees, there is this new section, and it was worth noting that we think that it's very beneficial to have the report submitted electronically, and I'll go into that on the next slide, but we think it's going to ease the burden for reporting requirements for our extractors. They have to indicate locations and maps and things like that, and we want to try and make it as streamlined as possible for them. It's also going to make it easier for us to manage the reports. And then going back to what Sam had mentioned about local control, we want to be able to make this information available to locals, particularly if we have to go in and do a probationary designation, collect the information. We want to make it available to local agencies when we return the basin to local control. So that's one of our goals with this. So we're currently developing a web-based electronic reporting form, and I'm going to show you some screenshots now. It's currently under development, so we're doing some internal testing. But essentially, extractors are going to be able to do some basic input into fields like this one right here, telling us their contact information. But there's also going to be an interactive map application. So reporters will be able to identify where their well is by using something that looks very similar to a Google map. They'll be able to bring it up, drop a marker, and tell us where their location of their well is, and then they'll also be able to select the parcels that they're using. And then, like Google Maps, they can toggle back and forth between a map view or the satellite images. So this is one of the tools that we're going to be offering for them. We're hoping to have this available for public testing later in June, and we're going to be updating our website with information. So we wanted to make sure we got this information out to the public now, but really after we get past the fees, we've been focused on those very heavily. That's going to be really our next step for outreach. We want to make sure that our extractors understand the reporting requirements and are comfortable using the system. So we're going to spend a lot of time in those areas where people are going to be reporting to make sure that they have the assistance they need to report to us.
Just a quick question. Is this, did you contract out for this tool, this web tool, or is this in-house development?
This is in-house currently.
In-house. So when it comes to then its applicability to other GSAs throughout the state, if I were a GSA and said, I really like this tool and I want to use it to help manage our own groundwater basin, would it be available to them?
Sam, do you want to touch on that?
I think we could make it available. I'd have to figure out the logistics of how that works, but it makes sense.
And it's worth noting that we are in the process of contracting out with kind of a larger rollout that will have a few more bells and whistles, particularly pertaining to kind of case management. So this is a temporary solution that basically has something available, but we're hoping that by November of this year, we've already contracted, we've already begun the development process with this other outside entity, and that should be available in November of this year.
And would that be proprietary then?
Actually, no, it would
Okay.
be the process that we use working with the Department of IT is, they're going to develop the code for us, but then they'll turn it over to the board, and then the board will manage that code after that. So it would be potentially available for other entities.
Great, yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to now do the recap of the fees. So that's the bulk of what you're considering today. And so we have broken the fees out into the water year 2017 fees and then fees that will start in water year 2018 and moving forward. So for water year 2017, we're proposing a base filing fee per well of $300 and a late fee of $100 per month. And as I stated before, there would be a maximum fee that anyone would pay of $1,200. So assuming they paid on time, it would be $300. The other thing is that we're really interested in supporting GSA formation. And so if a GSA forms after July 1st, but before the end of the water year, there are some GSAs that are really close, and we don't want to ding them for a small timeline issue. We're going to waive the fee. So SGMA's pretty specific. If you don't have a GSA by that deadline, you have to report to us for that water year, but we're not going to charge them for it. So moving on to the fees for water year 2018, we're proposing the same base filing fee of $300, but then we add in a volumetric rate. And this is tied back to those intervention stages that Sam went over. So essentially you step up by about $15 per acre foot as you walk through the state intervention process. So unmanaged extractors would pay $25 an acre foot. Extractors in a probationary basin would pay $40 an acre foot. And then if we have to end up developing an interim plan, it goes up to $55 an acre foot.
Because each of those takes a different level of work on our part, which we need to recover the fee for.
Exactly. And then finally for this one, we also have a late fee, and it's a 25% per month late fee. And again, the late fee is important because we're trying to take the burden of the entire program off of the compliant reporters, and because it's going to take us so much more time to work with late reporters. So that's why we have that there. Okay, so just to briefly go over an example of what that's going to look like. So for a hypothetical 50-acre farm that it's extracting 3.5 acre feet per acre, that's about 175 acre feet a year. Depending on the level of intervention occurring in the basin, they could be paying $4,500 up to close to $10,000, and that is an annual fee. So they would be paying that to us per year. So it's important to note that we do have a discount built into the proposed regulation. It's a $10 acre foot volumetric rate for unmanaged extractors that use a meter to measure groundwater extractions. We know that at present, meters are the most accurate way to measure groundwater extractions, and in an effort to support good data collection, but also to support the fact that it's going to take us as staff much more time to review reports that are coming in with various measurement methods, we're proposing this discount. The meter has to meet certain criteria, however, to qualify for that. So it needs to be permanently installed, equipped with a totalizer. It needs to be available for board inspections upon request. It needs to be calibrated every 5 years by a qualified individual, and it needs to be accurate to plus or minus 5% by volume. We feel very confident about that 5% by volume. We did some research and we found other programs in the state, as well as some of the associations that have done testing and research institutions. 2 to 5% is a reasonable accuracy standard for meters. So just to step back again and take a look at what that would mean for our hypothetical farm, they could potentially have a savings of about $2,600 just in that first year, and that would essentially cover a meter and installation. And then obviously for smaller extractors, over time they could definitely make up the cost on that. So the last one I wanted to point out in terms of the fee schedule is just that for de minimis extractors, as Sam noted, they are exempt from the unmanaged area reporting. But if we find that the de minimis extractors are significant in a probationary basin, we can loop them in. And if in fact we need to do that, then they would only pay a $100 flat filing fee. Again, that is an annual fee. Okay, so just to wrap things up and show you what our timeline is going forward, we're here to consider adoption of the fees and the entire regulation today. We're hoping to open up our electronic form for testing to the public in June. There is a deadline to form GSAs, June 30th, which means our fees are going to be effective starting July 1st. The water year ends on September 30th, which means reporting begins on October 1st, and then we're going to wrap things up hopefully on December 15th, and we're very hopeful that everyone will submit their reports on time, which would be great.
Would be great.
I do want to point out again that once we get this information, we're going to have a much better idea of what we're looking for and projecting into the future so that we can understand our programmatic costs. We'll know more each year, but this is really the first time we're going to get that information. And that'll allow us to go back and look at what our programmatic costs are and assess the fees and revise them if needed. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions that you have.
Any questions before we go to comments?
Just one quick one. What's the lag between the June 30th deadline and when you would be sending out notices for fees, I guess? You know, you can start July 1st, but how long do you anticipate any sort of notification really being for folks?
I believe we're looking at probably August would be, we're depending on what the quantity is that we end up with, there may be waves, but it'll take us some time to locate everyone, get the notices together, but August would be a good time frame.
Okay, thanks.
Terrific. We have a few speakers. I think we can go for 5 minutes each if they need it, though that doesn't mean you need to take it, of course. First, Bob Gore, representing all kinds of folks, lots of them, followed by Tom Versick, followed by Crystal Davis.
Sorry. Good morning. I'm Robert Gore from the Gualco Group on behalf of the Modesto Irrigation District, Kings River, Kern County Water Authority, United Conservation District, Alameda County Zone 7, and the California Association of Wine Grape Growers.
I figured you needed to say all of that, so I wouldn't say it too.
Yeah, yes, correct. With all due respect, there may be some need for ongoing clarity. SGMA, of course, is historic, and we're putting the wheels on the bus as it drives down the stream bed, to mix a metaphor.
It better not. We've got somebody from Fish and Wildlife in the audience.
That's right, and never mind, I won't mention the restrictions. The flow restrictions. The State Water Board over the past year has repeatedly expressed goodwill, and as the staff did today, added many specifics before the board could intervene. However, these aren't in the regulation, and they are referenced somewhat in SGMA, but some clarification may be needed to be added as we proceed. For example, the SGMA triggers mention the GSA is not done. Well, there are many that may not be done. It's obvious that there's going to be some disputes, some overlaps. So jumping into a GSA not being done may be a bit premature. So we may need to be judicious in how we proceed.
But trying to spell out every situation in a regulation is beyond what a regulation can do.
That's my point, is to be aware of operational clarity. Conversely, non-compliance may need to be specified as we proceed. And as you well know, with permits, especially at the regional board level, compliance is frequently delayed, waived because of local conditions. And of course, the whole process of SGMA is local preference and specificity. I go to a lot of budget hearings at the legislature. The BCP for this contains several items you may wish to read and be aware of. For example, the essential monitoring and reporting database, the bells and whistles version, to quote the staff, needs to be functional by July 1st. Apparently does not yet exist in full, and the RFP has not yet been published. Further, the BCP, as part of justification, notes there is no acceptable list of water wells. The counties, which are the, it's in there, which are the SGMA groundwater sustainability agencies of record, maintain lists of wells permits as they have since the 1940s. So there may be some needed provisions to work with them to find well locations. The program is going to be temporarily funded from the Water Rights Fund, and the 5 positions in the BCP are budgeted at more than $400,000 each. That's a bit expensive. We may need to have some clarity on that as well. Since hiring begins with the budget on July 1st, and the BCP states additional enforcement actions don't begin until December 15th, is the funding total actually less than 2.3 million? Is it more? And what are those additional enforcement actions? And finally, as with all things for the cost of compliance, we'd love to see some benchmarks and timelines as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Versick?
Good morning, Tom Versick. I have clients in the Salinas Valley, and that's my frame of reference, but I am looking at a broad set of regulatory things here. And so I had a couple of comment letters, and I had a last one which is slightly late, because anyway, slightly late. My point is pretty narrow at the right now.
It's like they responded to some of your comments.
The staff response covers a lot. My issue is I don't see that at the moment in the proffered regulation or in the resolution, which is why I suggested small edits. So what staff said, I think, is absolutely consistent with the statutes. But my suggestion is to make sure it's actually in those, in a different part of my practice where I deal with wills and trusts. You know, I tell people, yeah, we all understand this, but what if we just all left my office and got run over by a bus? It's for the survivors that need to understand what happened and what we're supposed to do. So I kind of bring that kind of perspective to this. But yeah, the staff presentation seemed to cover those issues. And then the metaphor, since we're using metaphors.
You may mix them too if you like.
Okay, I'll try. So a metaphor I've heard with Sigma is it's a carrot and stick. So the DWR happens to be the carrot. You guys are the stick in that metaphor. So, so you could be a big cudgel, or you could be a set of chopsticks, helping people move to where they need to be. So, and I understand there's staff resources and time and effort and, you know, all sorts of things. But just to keep that in mind, that if you can direct people, you're better off.
That's right. I think our hope is to use the lightest touch tool we have, which is why we negotiated for a lot of tools to achieve the desired result, with the desired result being local stepping up and doing the job.
Yeah, and the other...
Sometimes that's going to be a baseball bat. Other times, maybe chopsticks.
You may need to have a cabinet full of bats and cudgels and whips and what have you,
Exactly,
yes.
exactly.
And just an extra thing about just given the staff presentation about the forms under section 5200, I would think they would follow the forms DWR has under 5100, mostly, the statements of water diversion for surface rights.
Any response to either of those that you want to clarify now?
I think the last point is probably the easiest. You know, Water Code Section 5202 spells out very specifically what we have to collect. And I think we're looking at that more so than what water rights or any other kind of entity is collecting. We certainly want to make what data we collect as integratable, kind of looking at under, you know, the open data and kind of vision of the future. We want to make sure that what we do integrates with other board data collection sets. And that's something that we're going to look at with the contracted database going forward. But the kind of temporary interim reporting tool doesn't do that quite as much.
Called out so specifically.
Correct.
Along those lines, and maybe we're going to hear from Farm Bureau here, but the comment that Farm Bureau makes, yeah, about, let's see here. I'm going through their letter now on the accuracy on measurement, that we should follow other programs where we provide for greater flexibility on accuracy. Here we go, metering requirements. Draft regulations require 5% accuracy, much higher than that required by the surface water measurement. So I'm assuming that we can get a little more accurate on groundwater, and that's the reason that you have a 5%. What did you do to determine, what efforts did you take to determine that the 5% is achievable?
We evaluated existing programs that there actually are some local agencies that have good rigorous monitoring programs and extraction measurement programs, and their standards are varying between 2 and 5%. Also the AWWA, it's the American Waterworks Association, they kind of put out standards for what you can achieve with a meter. And it's different than surface water measurement just because they're open channel systems sometimes, and that's a lot harder to narrow down the specificity. It's also worth noting that it's not a requirement, it's just a criteria for a discount, so we're not mandating that people stick to this. They do have other options and measurement methods.
Great.
Great. Ms. Davis-Fadke, thank you for writing.
Good morning. Crystal Davis-Fadke. I'm the statewide SIGMA coordinator for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. We use groundwater up and down the state right now, currently in many areas that are unmanaged and subject to state board intervention. Also, many of our wells are unmetered. The regulations are very clear about the metering criteria, and my question is, will there be guidance forthcoming that will spell out what is the preferred methodologies for estimating groundwater use when you don't have a meter? We're planning ahead and want to make sure that what we're providing is what's needed, so it'd be nice to have a guidance on that. Thank you.
You all give some now or direct?
We are working on it, and we plan to have a guidance document available specifically on what she was asking for.
Good. Other questions? Comments?
Yeah, just a comment. I again want to thank you for all of your work on this, and mainly for just the way that you present the information. I think that it's gone a long way to take what started off to be a pretty controversial program into a place where people are just looking to you all for guidance on information. And so as long as that communication remains open, I think we're going to be in a better position to have as few as possible falling into these probationary, at least early on, designations. So thank you very much for your hard work. Just want to hear your thoughts on the flexibility that is contained within, I mean, we just had the briefing yesterday and just didn't think about it until I saw some of your slides. So in a situation where you have overlying GSAs, where community participants think that they're doing the right thing and it turns out that they're not. I mean, hopefully with all of the outreach, they will be aware way in advance that they're going down the incorrect path. But let's say you have a situation where local GSAs think that they're doing the right thing. They submit it and now they're subject to fees. Do you have flexibility? I know that there's that time frame early on, 180 days or whatever it is, but let's say it's a situation where it's just going to take a little more time to correct. Do you have flexibility to provide for adjustments to the fees where it seems to be consistent with, it would otherwise seem to be consistent with working toward a local solution?
Partly yes and partly no. I think that the main flexibility that we have is, we wrote in that if you are able to form your GSA by the end of the water year, we're going to waive that first initial set of fees. And so because of that, I think it does emphasize the need to work with the Department of Water Resources really quickly starting July 1st and figuring out, okay, who actually is unmanaged and where are the areas of concern? Where do we need to start doing, really fast and quick outreach to make sure that this isn't something that can be picked up immediately thereafter. And so if we can do some of that outreach, I think that will minimize the need to actually collect fees, that people will actually form their GSAs at some point before the end of the water year. There's also, and we didn't really discuss it here, but in Sigma, there's this assumption or the county presumption, which basically says if you do have overlapping GSAs initially, the county can actually come in and say, we're going to cover all of the unmanaged areas. And in doing so, that effectively shields local entities from state board intervention. And we are anticipating providing a little more flexibility in terms of when the county can claim that presumption. Just to make sure that, let's say you do have a GSA 1 and GSA 2, kind of like was shown in the presentation, that overlap each other and gets both of them thrown out. We are going to allow the counties to basically come in and say, we're going to pick up everywhere and then work with the individual GSAs over time to maybe modify the different approaches and work out their overlap so that they're still shielded from state board intervention. And I think that's actually the primary tool by which there is some flexibility in how this all gets worked out.
But the key is that it's got to be more than words.
Say that again?
It has to be more than words.
Correct. It has to be more than words. People actually have to show that they've done it. And I think that, there is a lot of flexibility in when GSAs are modified or how they're modified. I mean, there's no set in stone kind of limit on when a GSA can change its shape or its organization going through time. And we actually do anticipate that we know of a couple basins where the counties said, all right, we'll pick things up for now, anticipating that it's going to take a couple of months or maybe even an additional year to really figure out how the mechanics and the layout of the individual GSAs will work. And that's perfectly fine, and that prevents state board intervention. In terms of, the question was, do we have flexibility on the fees? I think after September 30th, we don't have as much flexibility in the fees other than the metering discount. And we do offer the opportunity for stakeholders or potentially people who are being assessed fees to petition the board and say that, the fee is being charged incorrectly. But in terms of waiving the fee or kind of discretionarily lowering it, I don't think we have as much flexibility.
But you'd be able to lower it if, for example, it ended up being more expensive than you estimated. You can make the fee lower the next year, just like in any other
Correct,
fee.
right. So year to year, we will continuously look at, what our expectation is, whether the fees seem reasonable based on the workload that we have. And if we need to revise them lower, we can do so. If we need to add some of these provisions later on that kind of consider more flexibility, we can do so. Given the kind of unknown and the uncertainty surrounding the program right now, we don't have a good handle on what kind of flexibility that would require. And we didn't want to open the door to something that was so flexible that we couldn't really move forward on the program.
Understood. And then I guess just a request with all the deadlines coming up. I assume you're going to do this, but it'd be great to have a report on what it looks like, what the GSAs look like once they're actually complete. What are some of the success stories or innovative ways that communities have taken action? And, just going forward, getting those reports, not just on the GSAs, but actual development.
Absolutely. In fact, I think we were going to propose coming back to the board for an informational item kind of in late July, once we've had a little bit of time to work with DWR and figure out where are the unmanaged areas. So that would kind of be a status update as of the first deadline, and then maybe coming back again in maybe December or late January and figuring out, all right, now that we've actually kicked the tires a little bit on the reporting system and had people start to report, kind of what things will look like.
You'll kick the tires, but you're not going to drive them down a stream bed, right?
Hopefully not.
Well, and at the appropriate time, maybe bringing in DWR as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. I suspect that means we need a motion at this point.
Move adoption of item 8.
Second, with pride.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, it carries. Thanks for the great work. I second Board Member Dalma's comments.
And might just say, great PowerPoint.
Yes.
Was that an Apple PowerPoint
I like
format?
I like
It
the
looked like
red.
yours.
Danger.
I got scared,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah, it was effective.
Background images were appropriate. Thanks.
Someone has to show me how to do that, Tam. Great. All right. We're now on to board member reports. I know we didn't do it at the last meeting because it had run on long, so I will turn to all of you for board member report. I'll let you go first. Because we've been sitting in hearings most of the time, so there are limitations on what we've done.
The only thing that, again, I would just kind of update on is the fact that Governor Brown is co-chairing with Governor Hogan from Maryland, National Governors Association Water Policy Institute. So the National Governors Association has a best practices wing of the work that they do, where they just kind of synthesize and bring together what's working within the states and an opportunity for states to share information. And Governor Brown agreed and was tapped to co-chair on this water policy initiative. And so I'm the co-chair with Secretary Grumbles from Maryland on the advisory group. So yeah, he's fantastic. I had a good conversation with him the other day. And so it's going to be, as much as it's an opportunity for us to be able to speak to the amazing creative work that we've done around conservation and really just pushing the ball through the drought and now into flood on water policy, it's also going to be an opportunity for us to hear from other states because, you know, as much as everyone thinks that, you know, California is doing everything great on all fronts, we have a lot to learn, as you all know, as well. So it's going to be a pretty interesting and great function. I'm going to the regional, Colorado River Regional Water Quality Board meeting on Friday. So it'll be my first regional board attendance down there. So that'll be fun.
Looking at the calendar, I guess we didn't talk about this the last time we got together. So yeah, I don't think I ever brought up a trip that I took to San Lucas, which is in the Salinas Valley, disadvantaged community. Yeah. So at the request of Supervisors Alejo and Salinas from Monterey County, Jim Mon and I went and toured San Lucas, which is a small disadvantaged community, and you know, trying to put together a program to get some funding to address contamination, groundwater contamination. And so there really seemed to be a preference to do a consolidation with King City, which is a little too far away, a little too costly. And I think Jim Mon, I wish he was here. Hopefully he's listening. He did a really good job walking through our program and typically what types of programs we fund, and that would be more expensive than anything that had come to us before. But there does appear to be another option, and that is wellhead treatment. And initially that didn't look like it would be a feasible option, but because of the Office of Enforcement's work with some responsible parties, it appears that it'll help to bring down the cost. So it was a very productive meeting, and just want to thank the Division of Financial Assistance for the good work that they do. The other thing is you and I went on a tour of Merced River. We were out on the river with two NGOs, Chris Schutz and Michael Martin, and Merced Irrigation District, John Swaggart, and Joe Mertz, their biologist, joined us. And I thought it was a really good day, learned a lot, and would encourage you to take the trip if you get an opportunity. I'm sure that that group would be happy to pull together a similar tour.
Right. I mean, it's one thing to hear at the hearings about the tailings pile. You may have something in mind in terms of tailings piles you've seen, but the actual enormity of what was done in gold mining along that river is mind-boggling. If you could imagine giant furrows of piles of river rocks, not gravel, like seemingly as far as the eye can see. It was eye-opening and inspiring because they also showed us some of the restoration projects that are going that are actually pretty exciting. And then we'll be going again to see it from the air next month. So we'll be able to tell you about that as well. All right, that's all. That's all I have for fun and games. I'll do what's coming up in the next presentation. And then Steve, if you're listening, thank you for listening. He just couldn't make it today. Executive Director's Report, item number 10.
Well, I guess the first thing I have to report is that this is my last report, so there is that. The only thing in my...
That is so sad.
the only thing I wanted to mention in the Executive Director's Report is under the Division of Drinking Water, we've got a section we're going to start adding called consolidations. And so we do identify, it shows 4, but there are actually only 3 that are bona fide consolidations. But, I have been talking with the division staff, and they have taken to heart the idea of trying to get as many of these consolidations going as possible. So these are very small projects, but they are permanent solutions, and so I'm glad we're making some progress on that.
Questions? Excellent report, and I would say more about this being your last board meeting, but I know you would hate it, so I will save it. But I will just say for the record, what an extraordinary public servant you've been, and how incredibly much we're gonna miss you, even as you won't miss us as you're off on your retirement. But if we could give you the key to the state board to come back anytime you want, you would be welcomed with open arms. It's just, it's extraordinary what you've done.
Thank you.
We'll save that. Do we want to move to organizational priorities or move into closed session now? What's your...
My recommendation, we do not have one of your chief deputies here who is, I think, pivotal for those priorities discussions. So I would recommend we go into closed session. We will put on the board when we come. I will come back in here when we go back into open session, and we will also put on the board so people can join us at that point in time.
All right. So why don't can we take a 10-minute break? Is that adequate? Just to hydrate and check email and Slack? Okay.
Absolutely, and the minutes will reflect that the board will only be meeting in closed session on the personnel item. There will not be a closed session on water fix.
you.